is the agenda for today. We are happy to present the following. Share with the audience a handful of useful tips compilated over the last 20 years of joint experience, advising on the initial steps into setting up and putting in place all required aspects for planning of the tax, legal, financial duties in which a typical company is involved with of information shared here within.
This is just to give you an idea about BDO worldwide and BDO Mexico. As you can see, I mean, one of the main circumstances that we have is the presence in 162 countries, and we have close to 2,000 offices worldwide. Our headcount as of the end of last year, it was over 80,000 persons, professionals working for the firm. And in regards to BDO Mexico, we have more than professionals working for the firm in Mexico, and plus the administrative employees that we have. So we are a firm close to 1,000 employees working for BDO in Mexico. Our main office is located in Mexico City, and however, we have some other offices all over Mexico. So with this particular structure that you can see listed as local offices, we basically attend all Mexico with all the requirements. The second and third largest offices are the Monterrey office and then the Guadalajara office.
Today, we have a special guest. And on your right, Jorge Santiesteban, who are close friends from the firm and have been very, very good professionals in corporate law. I would like to give now the opportunity to Jorge and to Diego to introduce their firm and let us know a little more about their labor over the years.
For you, I'm very pleased to be here with you and sharing all this information with you and helping and assisting with video in this presentation. Our firm was established 27 years ago, and curiously enough, we've been working with video ever since. We're dedicated totally to international counseling of corporations, from initial agreements to complex operations, as is indicated there. Our clients come from all over the world, basically Europe, North America, Asia, and some in Latin America. And the purpose in life is to add value to the business of the clients and giving them timely solutions. Our firm is incorporated based on with our group of highly qualified lawyers, all of them bilingual, English and Spanish. Pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
Well, first of all, we would like to start with this particular slide after the presentation of both firms. Basically, this is just general information about Mexico. The first thing is Mexico has a population of 124 million inhabitants. And the main cities and populations are Mexico City with 21 million, Monterrey with 4.7, and Guadalajara with 4.8. One circumstance that I would like to comment is that when you're planning to open a company in Mexico, it's very important to, first of all, analyze where you want to be located. I mean, based on our experience after years working with international projects, is that you have to make a decision based on probably where your client in Mexico is going to be located. Client abroad is going to be located, where your supplier, what kind of industry you are trying to attack, is one of the, or are several of the main reasons why you have to decide where you want to locate your company. Because besides the three main cities that we have in Mexico, we have other important industrial and commercial cities like Puebla, Tijuana at the border, Juarez at the border, with the US. So we have some other cities like San Luis Potosí, Saltillo, Querétaro, and Aguascalientes. Just to give you an idea of what I'm trying to comment about this is, for example, Saltillo or Puebla mainly, they are very, very automobile oriented in comparison to probably Guadalajara, which is more trading oriented. So what I'm trying to say is that when you're planning to open a company in Mexico, it's very important the location. Now, another circumstance that I would like to comment is that Spanish is the official language in Mexico. However, English is also understood by many members of the business community in larger cities. And of course, as you can imagine, also at the border. So our recommendation is that at least hire your key employees bilingual. That's probably one of the very, very recommendations that we do in general terms. The Mexico peso is the unit of currency. And as you can see, and we just listed there the last couple of periods or years. And as you can see, it has been pretty steady, the peso against the US dollar. I mean, even though with the speculation and the pressure with the new president has been kind of steady since the year 2016. We have a lump during the year 2015 where it jumped from 17 pesos for $1 to almost 20. But for the last 4 years has been in the 19.5 range. So has been very consistent and steady in that sense. And another important circumstance to mention is that the minimum wage per day in Mexico, it's around $5. However, what we see in the practice and when you're trying to attract better talent in Mexico and in the larger cities and in the border is that you will find that the wage for workers is going to be around $9 per day. This is a very important data about Mexico because in comparison with other countries, like for example the US, you will find sometimes that this will be the amount that you maybe will be paying for an hour. So this is one of the main reasons why international companies, they look into Mexico. I mean, sometimes it can be the proximity to the US, some other times it will be that you will find a labor that is kind of very affordable. And in this particular case, this is one of the key elements for doing business in Mexico.
Jose Luis, thank you very much. I wish to take this opportunity to refer to my partner, Jose Luis. He's in charge of the Monterrey office as director of the North region of our country. And he's also very well spoken in English. So thank you for your intervention today. On the right side of the graphic, I am able to speak about where's Mexico before the rest of the world. Member of the G8+5 country members. Mexico is also a member with the Organization for Cooperation and Economic Development since the last 20-something years, 25, somewhere around that. Also member of the World Trade Organization, the United Nations, the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement, known as NAFTA. Mexico is in the top 15th of the gross domestic product in the world ranking. So it's a heavy dependence in Mexico from industrial produce and exports. In Mexico, we have one direct tax law, which is the corporate income tax, which rate is 30%. As for sales, or also commonly known as value-added tax, 16%. The economy in Mexico is large. It is the second business partner to the United States of America, only after Canada. As for financing, it is worth to state that the Mexican reference rate, MIBOR, is currently at 8%. So that's the starting point from financing. Regarding inflation, it is also important that the economy in Mexico has overcome one very, very significant and dark past 20 years. We have controlled inflation. The biggest one we've seen so far is 2017 at 6.77%. It's important to outline because past generations were used to have important double-digit inflation that were very significant in the business community and also in the financial reporting. Last but not least, we hold currently an unemployment rate of 4.5% of the total population able to work. Pretty much our statistics.
Well, now that you told me our data and information about it, we are down here. I'm Diego Ferrer from Santisteban Abogados, and now trying to give you answers about what should you be aware when you will be incorporating a company in Mexico. I believe you have a big question in your head all the time that how can I enter to Mexico and develop all my business enterprise that I have in mind, what I need to do, what I should be aware. And perhaps the best way you can enter to the business and into Mexico is through perhaps you have a business partner. Companies, they go to the local embassies of their country down here and ask for information about how to begin with the business, how to enter to the country and perform businesses. So they go to the commercial offices and ask for all this information in order to have an idea of the soft landing, how to incorporate a business in Mexico. The way to incorporate the business will be related in a few moments, but it is important for you also to have information about the cultural barriers and the cultural information that Mexico offers for you, because it's pretty different that from abroad. So Jorge, you want to be
It's similar. This is Jorge Santisteban. It's similar doing business in Mexico than doing business in many other parts of the world. I don't want to preach to the choir, but when I used to live in the United States many years professionally, 10 years, I was witness of many Mexican investors and investors from other parts of the world arriving into the U.S., hearing the wrong people, mingling with the wrong distributors, the wrong partners, and the reason was that for some reason, they didn't do the whole research that it was needed to be done. I mean, it is important to identify, as Diego Ferrer was mentioning before, through the embassies, from the trade offices of the different states of the United States or the provinces in Canada, or the trade offices of European embassies, to identify the right professionals, identify the right partners, the right distributors, the right commission agents. And this is important because each country has its own cultural differences, in the sense of not all the countries have like a standardized bar exam or board exam in order to approve the professional activity of any professional coming out from colleges and universities. For example, I would say this, but in Mexico, there's no standard examination for any profession. But it depends upon where this professional comes from and which school it is graduated or which university. And that is an insightful information that can only be given by local people that you can trust. There are other cultural differences. If you want to, we can provide you information with that. We have presentations on those. One of the things that strike a lot to foreign investors into Mexico is the emotional closeness that the Mexicans tend to have towards people in general. So, for example, people coming from North America or some parts of Europe, they feel kind of impressed by the way Mexicans treat, such a friendly way, an open way, the starting part of doing business. Be aware of that, because not necessarily the fact of being emotionally open means that you can trust totally that person. Some people even come to us after having dealt with some local advisors that have said, don't you worry, you just give me $20,000. Let's just shake hands and I'll get you all the permits and I'll get you all the company that you want to incorporate and get you clients and distribution channels. Beware of those fancy and nice and optimistic presentations by advisors or advisors that you might have in Mexico. Be very, very careful. And as Diego Ferrer was saying, just try to be in touch with your local embassy or your local trade office so they can screen and for you the best business partners.
This is Jose Luis Castro with BDO, and I'm in charge of the number one initial aspects. Choosing a true business partner, the legal and accounting advisors, in my personal opinion, is one of the most important aspects when you are trying to invest in Mexico. I mean, basically, they will be your partners for a number of years, and they will be the ones that are going to be giving you the ABC of doing business in Mexico. So I think that this is a key element. So take your time, do as many interviews and meetings as you need, because it's an essential part of the business that you're going to be doing in another country. What kind of items you should be checking? I mean, definitely the experience of the firm. And sometimes what I've seen in the practice after many years helping and supporting international clients is that sometimes the fees could be a driver, but it's very important that you have to analyze the experience of the firm, but not only opening businesses, you have to understand also what kind of experience do they have working with international projects. So once you analyze that, I think that that's one of the key elements in selecting a firm, legal or for accounting. The international experience that they have, it's a key element. The other circumstance that I see that is important in the selection of a firm that is going to be your advisor is the right size for your operation. Other items, I mean, it's do that interview of the partner that is going to be in charge or the partners that are going to be in charge of your project. Plus, also, I mean, what kind of team is going to be backing up the whole element, the whole services. Of course, if you can see and analyze the references, sometimes if someone already work in Mexico and they can make you a reference about the legal firm or the accounting firm, I think also it's a good point of a start. Of course, the fees. I mean, from a fees perspective, I mean, the company must be happy with the service receiving, the value added that is receiving, and also the fees. And us as a firm, we have to be happy with the company that we're receiving to help, of course, also the fees. I mean, if we get into that particular break point, I think that is one of the elements to have a long-term relation in Mexico. And of course, I mean, what kind of value these kind of firms can add to your company in Mexico. So again, take your time when you're choosing the legal and the accounting firms or advisors that can help you to implement and to help you develop your company in Mexico.
Thank you, Jose Luis. For everybody there, if you have any question that you want to get answered, you can, I believe you have there in the chat a special part of questions and answers. You can write us at any time, so we will be delighted to answer you any question you have at any moment. It is important, as Jose Luis was mentioning, about the way you will be arriving to Mexico to begin business. You will have an election of an accounting firm and a corporate firm, a law firm. Many times the embassies and the commercial offices of the embassies will give you that information. Then you will have the question that how I begin business here. Need, of course, a legal vehicle in order to begin the business. And many times international clients believe that the best way to begin with the operations is having a branch here in Mexico, but there is not the only way to begin with the operations, because branches when you want to establish a Mexican operation just for promoting services and market research and coordination of distributors, but you are not at the beginning generating any kind of income. So you come down here only to perform businesses, to research on the market, and perhaps the result is, yes, I want to incorporate a business company, a subsidiary that will be a Mexican company or not. So depending the approach will be the recommendation. We always recommend to have a Mexican company. You will be having hands-on operation with local businesses down here. Both having a branch or having a Mexican company will have different liabilities, because if you choose to have a branch, the responsibilities will go directly to the principal office abroad. The principal office will be totally responsible for everything you do in Mexico. And then if you choose to have a Mexican subsidiary, a Mexican company, responsible of the Mexican company will be determined only to the operations made down here. This is because the Mexican company will be a different entity from its principal office abroad, and therefore any liability or claim by any third party will remain in Mexico and will not be of the office abroad. Commonly, to establish a company or a branch here in Mexico takes around like 3 to 5 weeks. It will depend on the way we with information from you, if you already have an election of the accounting firm or the law firm that you will be using in Mexico. There are certain requirements to have. Of course, there are documentation that we need to have from you in order to win the corporation. It is important you to know that here in Mexico, different than abroad, most that in the US, republics are very important down here, because you need to have all the word that is bylaws and articles of incorporation duly notarized down here. Notary will give you like public faith to that documents, and that information will need to get to the notary in order to be incorporated. Mainly there are certain differences also if you choose to incorporate a branch rather than a subsidiary in the documentation. It's more or less the same. We need to have powers of attorney, and as said, a draft of the bylaws and the articles of incorporation. It will vary depending of the what you choose, but mainly is the same. We have in Mexico several types of companies. Mainly, there are two companies that are the most incorporated down here. The first one is the limited liability company. That is like a closed-held company corporation for a closed group of owners. And we have also the limited stock corporation. That is a Sociedad Anónima, SA, a corporation with different owners and shareholders. We recently adopt another modality of limited liability stock corporation that is called SAPI. That is a promotion stock corporation. If you are willing to have like investment to be most investors, that is an option for you. All these companies have variable capital, and all these two companies have the similar characteristics. The shareholders or partners are only liable for the capital contribution that they made to the company. The directors are liable for law and diligent administration for the company and live abroad. There is no obligation to be here. And it is very important at this point. In Mexico, it is an obligation to have at least 2 shareholders or partners in order to incorporate in Mexico, a Mexican company. Or other differences, at the SA, the stock corporation can quote at the Mexican Stock Exchange. And the SRL, that is the limited liability company, is a closed-held company that it's appropriate for a single owner, the same interests in the company. We have no exchange controls in Mexico, and any repatriation of dividends and other transfer of monies is free. It's possible in Mexico.
Diego, this is Jorge Santisteban again. Just adding up a little bit on Diego's presentation on the type of companies. The reason for setting up a company in Mexico is a market result, depending upon how your product or your service is already penetrated the Mexican market. Companies decide to set up a company or not. Many clients prefer to establish a company forced by their own customers in Mexico, that they want local invoices, to have somebody here with responsible in the Mexican Republic in order to be able to answer for any liabilities, maintenance of products or services. That counts. I mean, it's not just a decision of an academic decision of setting up a company or not. Even before setting up a company, it's been our experience that during the procedure where an investor comes into Mexico goes through different stages before even setting up a company. Initially, they look for a sales agent. Companies, let's say, that have a service, software, products that they sell, what they do is that they hire a sales agent to come to Mexico and perform market investigation and start contacting prospective clients in Mexico. And sometimes that sales agent is somebody that comes from abroad, from the country of origin of the provider. And what happens with the sales agent is that they should not have powers to bind the foreign entity in Mexico. In other words, if the sales agent, which usually is an individual, not necessarily a company, but usually is an individual that comes from abroad, not have powers to bind or make foreign entity or principal liable for any operation in Mexico. They should do only sales promotion. And at the end of the day, if there's a deal going on, that deal has to be closed abroad. It shouldn't be closed in Mexico. If the sales agent has powers to bind foreign entity in Mexico, then we have issues of violation of foreign investments law. There's a tax consequence because it's deemed to be doing business in Mexico and appears what is called a permanent establishment. It implies that it's a de facto branch in Mexico, and that permanent establishment means that the foreign company, because of the acts of the sales agent, implies that is as Diego Ferrer was mentioning, is a branch in Mexico and will have to pay corporate taxes for the gains, for the profits made in Mexico. Then the other thing is that if the sales agent has powers to bind the foreign entity, then we have a violation of the commercial laws in Mexico, because the foreign entity will be having a branch in Mexico, doing business in Mexico, and should be registered as a company in Mexico. The final part is violation of immigration laws if the sales agent is foreigner, because sales agents need to have, if they're doing business in Mexico, they need a visa for doing business in Mexico, not just a tourist visa. Finally, and this is an interesting thing, and we'll be mentioning a little bit about labor laws in Mexico, which are no picnic. Labor law applies immediately to any sales agent that is located in Mexico and makes the sales agent an employee, but makes the foreign entity an employer, and is subject to all the legislation of the labor law, which means severance payments. There's no employment at will, and there's even something called profit sharing distribution, which is 10% of the profits of the principal for the business performed in Mexico. That's as to sales agent. The other way of doing business in Mexico after sales agent is, or together with sales agents, depends. Commission agents. Commission agents is the same treatment as many other parts of the world. They're again sales promoters. Again, they don't have powers to bind the principal, and they're limited only to take orders and receive payments. Those payments have to be sent outside. They don't close deals in Mexico, and they receive a percentage of the sale performed. There's no specific statute for local agents in Mexico. There's an arm's length negotiation. Some countries in Latin America do have statutes for protecting commission agents, including even before sales agents, that you cannot terminate them at will. So basically, commission agents could be individuals or it could be companies. Many international companies hire local commission agents for such purpose and promote their business. Finally, there are the distributors. Usually a distributor are local companies, could be fully owned foreign companies that own a Mexican company in Mexico, or could be just local Mexican company, 100% foreign owned or 100% Mexican owned. What they do is they acquire the product from abroad, from Mexico, and resell it in Mexico. There's no legislation for the termination and formation of distribution agreements. It's an arm's length negotiation. Some countries like Costa Rica, for example, that we have dealt with, in order to have a distributor, you can contract the distributor, but you cannot fire the distributor unless there's severance payment. In Mexico, it's an arm's length transaction, and the distributor could be terminated as well. Basically, that's it for the aspect. Sales agent, commission agents, and distributors. Turn off.
Thank you very much, Lightning. And after following that path of which is the best way to be represented in Mexico, there is an opening key, a very important factor to start interacting in the economic environment in Mexico, which is, as many other countries, to obtain the tax ID. The tax ID registration is a starting point because for such, to set up a bank account, it will be required to start creating sales invoices. It's required for almost any legal and corporate activity, the entity, could that be a branch, could that be a subsidiary, involved with. I would like to give you just a brief reflection on how this is to happen. Once the company is incorporated or the branch is properly to the economic ministry in Mexico, the tax ID obtention has to be processed with a tax representative holding powers of attorney, who necessarily has to have a Mexican tax residence. Foreigner, but as long as this person has a personal tax ID validly recognized before the tax authorities, that's one element. And another one is the fact that it is necessary for the tax authority to have a physical location in which the authorities, 100% certain that the new taxpayer becoming incorporated or becoming registered be available and easy to find. Mexico has started to down tons of logs and a lot of means to background checks and inspections to assure that the taxpayer is truly located when initially stated. So these two elements are a couple of services we can help you with. Be delighted to elaborate in further consultations. I would now like to give the word to Jose Luis, my partner, regarding which tax should be the one to prefer.
Thank you, Mauricio. I mean, one of the comment that I always do to new projects in Mexico is that they need to share with us the plans that they have in the short, mid, and long term. And also that I want them to be creative in the sense of if they are planning to do what kind of activity in Mexico and what other kind of activities they will probably perform in the future. I mean, all those elements are the ones that help us to see what will be the best tax structure for the companies. I mean, in the practice, I've seen that sometimes companies will start with a trading activity, and then they will be switching in the very short term to production. And they never commented us about that particular possibility. And I totally understand that sometimes you are just trying to feel, I mean, what could happen in Mexico, and then one thing just drives to the other one. But I think that it's very important that we must have a sit down and taking enough time to understand all the possibilities that the company has for Mexico. I mean, because it's not the same if the company is going to be a simple production facility that if they are going to be an inbound or a maquiladora company. It's not the same if they are going to be trading their products in Mexico or they are planning to do production and trading them with other countries. I mean, it's not the same if they're going to be importing on a permanent basis or they are going to be importing on a temporary basis. They are going to be transforming the product and take everything out of Mexico. I mean, those kind of circumstances will drive a totally different scenario. And that's the reason why we have to have a full understanding of all the possibilities. And we will be helping you. I mean, we can help you choosing the correct tax structure for your company or group of companies for Mexico. We can also help you and support you with all your tax obligations that are needed for Mexico. And the other very important thing, but not the last, is that transfer pricing. Mexico is sensitive to transfer pricing activities. So it's very, very important that also address all the type of activities that you will have with related parties, with the Mexican entities, so we can analyze not only from a tax perspective of Mexico, but also we have to analyze the treaty between the countries involved in such transactions. So that's the reason why we need to have a full understanding of the transactions that you are planning to have between related parties in regards to your Mexican entities.
Jose Luis, yes, that's very important because depending the business you will be developing here in Mexico will be the type of tax regime that you will be meeting. Also, it is important for you to know that, well, Mexico is like the land of the opportunity to the foreigner because not only the geographical situation is very favorable for Mexico, it is also that we have many businesses and sectors of the economy that you may explore or perhaps that you have in mind in order to develop here in Mexico. You need to know that there are certain activities that are reserved to the state only for purposes that you cannot make and do businesses of that. For example, exploration and extraction of oil, planning and control of natural electrical system, creation of nuclear energy, and insurance of coins and bills, of course, are reserved to the state. All other activities are allowed to the foreigners. Certain activities are perhaps allowed a specific percentage within the company, but you need to have in mind that all the business that you are willing to develop here in Mexico allowed. We have a question here that from Alejandro Calderon to all the panelists. Can a Mexican company establish a domicile by having a signed agreement with another Mexican company? We will have further.
Mauricio speaking here, and not quite. This is one of the laws that were established in 2015. Prior to December of that year, 2015, it was quite easy to reflect where the tax domicile was going to be assigned. Nevertheless, with some modifications that happened internally, the elements or the elements tax authorities place were to expressly and evidently be able to state which was the nature of the relationship between the location, the particular office or address, and the new shareholders. How were you able, as an applicant, to obtain a tax ID, to demonstrate what nature of relationship? The cases we find there are either dated by leasing agreements for an office that have to be under the legal requirements of at minimum 12 months, establish a rental price, and many other requirements from a true leasing agreement. That's one of the methods followed to obtain a tax ID with a fiscal domicile. I hope this answer is wide and good enough to concern.
A little bit to the possibilities to the foreigners and opportunities for foreign investors. It is important you to have in mind that foreign companies and the representatives being foreigners are not allowed here in Mexico to open bank accounts and sign checks and everything related. You need to have a specific immigration authorizations, permits, visas in order to be able to do that. Also, if you are an individual seeking to coming down here in order to buy in the beach and for residential purposes, there are also certain limitations, but that is like very specific information. Now we are going to the next point. Toward the corporation Mexico.
Thank you very much. These steps are just a pale sample of everything that needs to be done. And we try to be comprehensive in the matter. We try to give you the most, but the devil is in the details, as they all say. The first step is, now that I have my business properly registered and properly set up, what do I have to do to start issuing the first sales invoice? Well, that's another issue. Ever since year 2010, Mexico adopted an electronic platform to start creating invoices. It's the only accepted method before the tax authority to issue an invoice is on their platform or to use a patented IT solution company that is to be able to set up specific fields in order to be able to create that invoice. Just for everyone's information, if it happens that you have an issue, unattended issue with the tax authorities, they are able to place the switch down to turn off the invoicing of your company. So it's a really important issue that you keep compliant, file all the applicable returns, all the requested information, so that you don't face the risk of your business platform to find itself disabled to create invoices. A few questions from our participants. Allow me to go back to this at any time. We have from Luis Alejandro. Can you explain in general terms the profit sharing in advance? This is coming. Sure. And yes, this is a very repeated question about profit sharing. But we are getting there in item number 2.
Thank you, Mauricio. Again, yes, item 2, hiring third parties and employees. As Jorge mentioned at the very beginning, in Mexico, labor law is not picnic, so you need to be aware. Know that labor law in general is for the employee. We don't have employment at will down here. To terminate someone, you need to have a cause in order to terminate. So therefore, it's advisable for you to have well-drafted labor agreements and well-defined and limit the rights that the employee and obligation that the employees will be having in order you have a more leverage in order to make a good termination. If any business operation in Mexico will depend upon the quality of individuals you will be hiring. So we strongly recommend you to have like previous employment screening or background checks about the people you will be hiring in Mexico. There are many companies in Mexico, specific companies that provide such screening services in order you to have well individuals in your company. Um, Also, labor law is drafted in favor of the employees, as I previously mentioned. If you have an individual in Mexico that has with you subordination, meaning that will be following your directions, and economic dependence, that his or her income 50% of the total income he receives, will create a labor relationship down here. So it is important you to have this in mind. We have, I will be just mentioning certain highlights because it allows us to have like a complete webinar independent than this. But in Mexico, we have indefinite term labor relationships, defined project, defined term relationships. And we entered like 5-6 years ago to a new type of employment relationships that give you the employer certain capacity to prove an ability to verify if the employee that will be hired has the knowledge and the tools to develop the service. We have seasonal agreements, trial agreements, and initial training agreements. If you want more information of these, of course, you can write us to the email. We can provide you with a specific memorandum in this topic. Having an employee will give him or her certain fringe benefits that you need to pay as an employer. Have a specific period of vacations. Here in Mexico, we have less vacations than all over the world. We begin with only 6 days of vacations. There will be increasing 2 days per year when reaching 12 days after the 4th year. There is a vacation premium to be paid that is 55% of the top of the normal daily salary. And bonus like Christmas bonus called here aguinaldo, that you will be paying the employee at least 15 days of their salary. There are statutory holidays. Going as Mauricio was mentioning about the profit sharing. If you had employees in a Mexican company, the employees are entitled to receive a 10% of the annual net pre-tax earnings of the employer, distributed among all employees other than certain high officers, such as the general manager. Managers are not allowed to receive this profit sharing, and that's the reason why we sometimes, or many times, recommend to our clients to incorporate or have an outsourcing company in order to avoid this labor risk. Having an outsourcing company or a services company that will be like an in-source company allow you to avoid this labor risk. Perhaps I don't know if Jorge wants to mention something about that because it's important.
In the last months, there's been this confusion of the fact that outsourcing is possible in order to avoid the profit sharing distribution. I mean, that is totally possible. Profit sharing distribution, it's when the company has profits and then there's an obligation to give away 10% of the net profits, all the employees except for the general manager. There were some abuses, some so-called outsourcing companies that created companies that made the employees like partners, and they didn't give away any of the benefits of Social Security, and there were no payment of payroll taxes. And so at the end of the day, the government realized that these companies were not paying all the taxes in favor of the employees and in favor of the own government on the payroll. Even, it sounds funny, but this is regardless of the fact of the 10% profit sharing. I mean, the 10% profit sharing is really has not been to this point an issue. Many companies have their own tax planning and their own accounting planning, so sometimes that profit doesn't come out. As profit sharing can be avoided, as I said before, labor outsourcing, and basically, as Diego Ferrer was mentioning, you can have an intra outsourcing company by creating a services company within your group, or hire an independent outsourcing company. There are some rules about it. Then again, the operating company will generate the business and the profits, and the services company will hold the employees. Some U.S. companies, clients that we have, they call them leasing companies for the leasing of employees, and they don't have profits to share. The rules are important to follow. The services company has to supervise all the services of the employees. The client, which is the company that hires the services company, cannot transfer all of its employees to the services company. The other rule is the services company cannot cover equal tasks already covered by the client. Let's say the profit generating company has salespeople, and then they all of a sudden create another company for sales purposes. That is not possible. You have to have different activities for each company. They have to be of a specialized nature. The services hired by the services company, let's say, it could be maintenance people, could be people that are in charge of updating software or so. They want the government that these services will be different from the services provided by the company that is the services company, in other words, the client. And then the most important one is that the client that hires the services company should verify that the services company pays Social Security and payroll taxes. That's basically it for the services.
Jorge, thank you very much. Highly enlightening. And if you allow me just to place my 2 cents, I would have to say that these transactions in the insourcing company and the operative profit-making company should be at a fair market value. And for that reason, it is mandatory to run always, every year, a transfer pricing study. Always hold an agreement that meets those policies, international policies from the OCDE. Plus, a very common question is if a company that has created tax losses from prior years they carry forward for income tax calculation. Yet that's valid. Nevertheless, for the profit sharing calculation, which happens to use the same basis, that's not allowed. The losses from prior years in the profit sharing cannot be offset for future years. Much what we can give you. Of course, there's many other aspects and considerations, but we have to follow up with the agenda. On the steps we were mentioning, we're now moving towards step number 3. What is the choice of corporate governance and management schemes? As Diego mentioned earlier, the 2 types of most common figures of corporations, you can either create a board that is holding full powers of attorney, or you can have a sole administrator that is one person running the full show. Plus, it is allowed to have third parties that don't belong to the organization, limited powers of attorney. They can be jointly granted. They can be given with some thresholds or for number of transactions. And they also can give even, and this is a very important advice we give to our clients, these powers of attorney may be given for certain terms. Give them out for only 2 years, 3 years, to see if these 3 years work properly. And if anything goes smoothly, then you can have a renewal in a future shareholders meeting. As for the examiner, this is applicable only for incorporated that are shareholders entities. The examiner is a must. It's a legal compliance. Yet we often find that the bylaws state many other type of corporations do also have to place an examiner or a mandatory external audit firm perform reviews. So just when you are drafting your bylaws and the articles of incorporation, let's do a very diligent review on what and how to do that type of tasks.
Later on, Mauricio, to the back office services. Okay, at the very end. Okay.
Okay. Following to the point number 4, most common registrations and enrollment before agencies. Once you have the company duly incorporated in Mexico, Mauricio already mentioned you will need to have the fiscal ID of the company in order to open the bank accounts and everything related to tax purposes. You also need to register the company before the well, we put in a list of the specific agencies that we consider are the most relevant about the registration you need to have. I was telling you need to make the registration before the register of commerce of the companies in Mexico in order to have the company registered there. That will be always requested by the banks, for example, in order to open the bank account, and many companies and providers will be requiring you the register of commerce. That will be evidencing that your company is duly registered before that registry. Then you have to, as you will be a Mexican company with foreign capital and participation, you will need to perform filings before the Foreign Investments Registry. Foreign Investments Registry needs to be done yearly if you have certain thresholds are confirmed, and they're also quarterly if you, for example, change your corporate scope, change your domicile, tax domicile, your name, or you are with certain thresholds that are also stipulated in the corresponding law. When you obtain the fiscal ID, you will need to go to the Social Security Institute in order to perform registration. So you will be having employees, and then you need to have the registration. Having the Social Security Institute will allow you also to have the Housing Fund Institute. The Housing Fund Institute is that for the employees that in the future will be requesting you to, that institute to have loans in order to obtain housing at a certain specific price. For the employees, yes. And there are a lot of registration that you can see in this presentation. But for example, if your specific business will need to have a local payroll is for everybody. Depending on the state you are performing a business, you will have a different percentage to pay. Commonly, it's 2.5 to 3%, depending the state. That is the local payroll tax. Importer's license, for example, if you will be a company dedicated to performing importations here, you will need to have the importer's license. Customs broker will be also essentially at that point. Also, depending if you perform certain activities that are considered at the money laundering legislation, you will need to report vulnerable activities before the Financial Intelligence Agency. There are specific, for example, the Sanitary Risk Prevention Commission, that is called here COFEPRIS, depending on the Ministry of Health. If you are importing, for example, certain canned food, seafood, you need to have specific registrations there. It is all medical devices, medicines, drugs, and this is only for you to know that depending the core of business that you will be developing down here, there will be always a registration, a filing that you will need to perform. Always having the assistance of the tax and the accounting firm, and of course the law firm will be essential for you. Information about the filing and registration that you will need to have there. I don't know if I want to mention another more. Only to few.
I don't want to overwhelm you within. Believe that there's all kinds of registrations all the time for all kinds of businesses. There are some, of course, the tax registrations. I mean, this is rounding up on what Diego was saying. The Social Security, when you have employees, housing, etc. You're going to be importing. There's an importer's license. Certain activities that are called vulnerable for financial purposes, for the money laundering. Obviously, is when you are doing financing or setting up financing companies. There are no there's a question here. There are a couple of questions here. Is how long it takes to be incorporated. I think Diego mentioned that before, but it very much depends upon the client. I mean, we really can spend a few hours preparing bylaws, preparing the first incorporating meeting, also called in the U.S. Articles of Incorporation, and the special powers of attorney in favor of members of our firm in order to incorporate the company before a notary public. Usually that's because they are abroad and they cannot come to Mexico, and normally they are companies, so there has to be attorney granted in the country of origin before a notary public, and then legalized through something called the apostille. That for us can take like 3-4 days at the most. But the most important thing is that we receive the information from the client as to what will be the equity, what will be the name of the company, who will be the board of directors, administrator, the local agents. Sometimes they already have like a manager, what kind of powers they will be having. Of course, powers for the accountants and for the lawyers for filing. And there's an expression that we use very much in our firm. Lawyers are important, accountants and tax advisors are more. That work that is sent over to the client abroad can take even 2 to 3 weeks. I mean, and that is out of our hands. From experience, we can incorporate a company like in 2-3 weeks, normally if the client provides us with the information. There's a little secret that we can share with you. When there's a true urgency, and for some reason the client is somewhere on the other side of the world, sometimes we accept to set up the company ourselves. Then a minute thereafter is incorporated, the stock or the partnership parts are transferred over to the client. Very exceptional. I don't know if that answered the question, but I hope it did.
Yes, thank you very much. Managerial controls. I mean, any new company in Mexico must appoint different persons for different responsibilities. So, for example, you have to name a legal representative before the IRS. You have to appoint someone that can be the legal representative before Social Security when a company will have employees, for example. You have to appoint another person as the legal representative before the bank. So there are several positions that from a management perspective you have to name in Mexico. And the way that you name those persons are through a lawyer that will grant powers of attorney for different circumstances in order to represent the company before different institutions in Mexico. This is a very awkward circumstance because, I mean, to open the company, you must appoint these persons, but in the meantime, you don't have anyone in Mexico. And sometimes when you want to appoint foreign persons to act as the representatives before Mexican authorities, there are limitations for it. So what can you do about it? And that's how video can help you with it. I mean, we have been named in several occasions as the legal representatives of the company for the initial phase of the business. So in that way, in that sense, I mean, what we do is we will be your representative before Social Security, Mexican IRS, even before the bank, for a period of time that it will be needed for the company to hire their own employees, to find who can be the trust persons inside your company, point can take over the responsibilities that video will have for a period of time. I mean, sometimes, I mean, this can be from any given weeks to even months. And in some of the cases, in special occasions, we can act as the representatives almost for a year or so. So this is something that it's pretty common, but definitely video can help you to sort this out and help you with the support of the lawyers and with the powers of attorney to attend the managerial personalities that you will need for the entity in Mexico.
Luis, thank you very much. Now moving towards the second item. Regarding bank access and cash disposals, Diego mentioned earlier that there are certain limitations to foreigners regarding holding powers of attorney to a company and being a foreigner. That is to be able to set up a bank account. There's no limitation regarding management in the internet platform. That is performing activities for banking, bank accounts, investments, and such. As long as you have a person who holds powers of attorney under the Mexican law to set that up, the access and the permits can be provided and openly assigned to the treasury in the headquarters. So this is often a corporate scheme for companies to be able to manage their business. However, we have found in our experience that also that task assigned and carried out by the accountants. BDO in that case has that activity in the portfolio of services we can provide. Recently, we have implemented even further and larger controls in terms of carrying out the payment instructions and who is the last link in terms of approving and releasing. This is somehow a very reliable path on everybody being involved and properly managing cash, which is by far the most valued entities. By having full visibility and providing the clients the last to the process is how we are able to, of course, every time at every moment, perfectly auditable, reviewable, and provide all the logs of the access and we are generating, but yet you hold the wheel in terms of bank management.
The last 3 and 4 items to consider every calendar year closing. I think you mentioned the foreign investment.
Filings yearly or quarterly, depending the thresholds, if the thresholds are confirmed. This is an obligation related from the tax and the corporate side. You will need to approve each within the first 4 months of the year financial statements of the prior year and confirm through a shareholders meeting. Want to pay dividends? That's the opportunity to pay dividends. You can also do at other time of the year, but we are being kosher that that's the specific time to do. From the tax side, you need to comply with the tax returns and everything related.
Yeah, the monthly and annual tax returns.
Yes, this item, number 3, has to do with a lot of planning because all of a sudden you're facing the year end. For corporate purposes, it is December 31st. Whatever happens, it is going to be always December 31st, regardless of the corporate rules in terms of fiscal year. And like mentioned by Diego, agencies in which the entity has to be compliant with must exhibit balance sheet and P&L reports a year. We have many mandatory which insist the applicable GAAP, either local or international, the IFRS, have to be considered or to be properly disclosed, which are not applicable or not considered. The income tax calculation for year has no advance payments, so it can become, if the entity in its first years of corporation is successful, to be a heavy load paying out the 30% of the taxable profit. That is on a March 31st of the following year deadline. Many other that have to do with the closing of the year are also making the proper informative returns before the tax authorities. When entities hold foreign investment, many other applicable to a typical taxpayer. When an entity holds intercompany transactions, add a few more. When a company holds, like Diego mentioned earlier, those companies hiring manpower from a third party, employment leasing type of entities, also closing and informative returns are to be based. I mentioned earlier about the examiner. So that examiner must also on a yearly basis provide in the ordinary stockholders meeting his report of examination for the entity. On top of my mind when I can make reference, unless you want to make a further note.
Common mistakes that the company makes or do because want to avoid certain times or certain time about, for example, try to avoid doing monthly the updating of the corporate books, for example, and then it comes the audit process and we need to perform and to update the corporate books in the same night that the audit process will be taking care, I don't know, tomorrow, for example. There's also certain risk and mistake, very common, the lawyer or the accountant, for example. I have a cousin that, or within the company, you hire like the legal area and you try to make a joint venture agreement or a very specific agreement, rather going to the accounting firm and ask for the tax consequences and to the lawyer in order to draft that agreement. Very common also. As Jorge mentioned at the very beginning, feeling confident about that shaking hands in Mexico is the way to do business. It's not the very most advisable way to do that. We strongly recommend you to have a business partner, the correct lawyer, to find the correct accounting firm in order to begin business in Mexico. And finally, it's not the last one, but I believe it's important that many times when you begin doing business operations, there will be a guy telling you that you can have the tax domicile with him. And that is a very high risk. The accounting firm like BDO offers always the office services that will provide you with a tax domicile. They will take care about all the tax records, returns, and everything related. So it is important you to have that in mind.
Maybe we don't want to bore you too much with details. As you have seen, this is a presentation that has a lot of the technical aspects. But maybe the whole idea of this presentation is letting you know that you can develop your core business. You will have a couple of firms, especially the accounting firm, also the legal firm, care of all these liens, registrations, handling of corporate books, handling of bank accounts, develop your business and generate profits in Mexico. I mean, that's the whole thrust of this presentation. That it came across in a friendly and way in order to be assimilated way. I don't know. We want to say something else, Mauricio.
We are just 15 minutes before we come up, so I want to start wrapping up, if you don't mind, by moving towards the last screen. And this slide is for my partner, Jose Luis. But just a brief mention of, if you hold a question, please, by all means.
BDO, I mean, this is our areas of expertise. And what we like to comment is that in general terms, we tailor-made all our services. I mean, all what we have been discussing today, this is something that we provide out of our BSO department, which is business services and outsourcing. So, I mean, through all the presentation today, all the webcast, we have been commenting about what kind of services do we provide, but as a summary of it, I mean, we can provide you the initial advisory and management, and also help you with the outsourcing of accounting, taxes, payroll, and even treasury when it's needed. And what happens normally in the practice is that since we tailor-made all our services, we find out that since we have clients that they have a few employees to up to, I think the largest client that we have in the Monterrey office is close to 900 employees, and we're still helping them with outsourcing services. I mean, all depends on the goals, all depends on the sizes. We always see companies that they start with something, and then we provide all these kind of services. And when they start growing, they start taking certain responsibilities after a month or after a year or so being in Mexico. And that's not an issue. I mean, because we understand the needs, and we also understand that there are different phases of the business or the company in Mexico. And after they grow, sometimes they will just jump into our second department, which is the audit and assurance. I mean, it's very common that at some point the companies will be big enough, so they will just take over all sourcing responsibilities. They will hire their own controller. They will have their own team of payroll specialists, and they will have now all the legal representatives needed for managing the business in Mexico and being in charge of the treasury. So they will say, you know what, Jose Luis, after this year, beginning the year 2020, now we are going to be full responsible everything. So that's when we jump into other departments, because we can now be their auditors. We can help them providing tax advisory, review the taxes on a yearly basis, quarterly basis, annual basis as needed. And that's the reason why normally all our clients had with us for a number of years. Also the transfer pricing, and we commented in one of the slides the importance of the transfer pricing. Video Mexico has a very, very extensive and large expertise providing transfer pricing studies. Just to give you an idea, the Monterrey office elaborates more than 350 transfer pricing studies on a yearly basis, just to give you an idea of the size of that particular department in the Monterrey office. And in Mexico City is larger than our office. And any other international tax circumstance, trade, customs, also we have that. The video has a very large also foreign trade department. The biggest foreign trade department is located in Monterrey, due to the location of the Monterrey office, which is pretty close to the south of Texas. We are only 2 hours driving for south of Texas. So as a consequence, and due to the type of businesses that we have in the Monterrey office is the reason why we have that. But that doesn't mean that we cannot help any other location or any other office. As a matter of fact, I mean, the main offices, they also have a trade and custom department. And at the end, but not last, advisory. I mean, we can help you once the company has a size that is needed with any specific item like risk consulting, cybersecurity, corporate finances, you name it. Please visit our website. Well, you can find a little bit of the history of our firm. You can find the partners at this moment of the different offices, the expertise. There's a quick resume about each of the partners of our office. And you can also review in detail the different services that we have. So any comments, any questions, we'll be more than glad to try to address them. Please give us a note, send us an email, give us a call. We'll be in the best disposition to help you and to try to solve any comments or questions in regards to Mexico.
I want to thank again our visitors, honored visitors, Ferrer and Jorge Santisteban from Santisteban Law Firm. We make a great couple in business terms. So whatever your concern, whatever your plans, whatever your interest in considering Mexico as your next market to expand to, feel free. Jose Luis Jasso, my partner, and Mauricio Perez Duarte are very honored and very thankful to deserve your attention. Look forward to be of service in the future. And just, we are all now new areas and new opportunities and new markets. If you address to the people you know, they know video. Thank you very much.